Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome. Very pleased to see you here today. Thank you so much for being here. I want to welcome you all back to yet another installment of our visiting speaker series here in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Macau. Today, we are graced in person by the estimable Professor J.J. Joaquin. Professor Joaquin is a professor of philosophy at De La Salle University in the Philippines, from where he also received his PhD some years ago. Professor Joaquin works on a number of different topics. He has over 40 publications spanning topics such as philosophical logic, philosophy of religion, philosophy of love and friendship, history of analytic philosophy, philosophy of AI, philosophy of pedagogy, really just a dizzying array. Very exciting. Today, Professor Joaquin is here to talk to us about pluralistic theism and religious syncretism in Southeast Asia. So he will speak for somewhere in the vicinity of 50 minutes, after which, as usual, we'll have Q&A, after which, as not so usual, we will have a reception. So with food, that's the less usual part, yes. Okay. With that, I would love if we all thanked and welcomed Professor Joaquin.
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks to Victoria for the invitation. And thanks to my friend Jeremy and Jan for coming here. Okay, so I'm JJ from the Philippines. I'll talk about an exciting project I'm working on right now on pluralistic theism and religious syncretism. So here's an outline of the talk. I'll talk about the motivation behind the project. If you're familiar with blended spirituality, I'll talk about that as well. And I'll explore two philosophical explanations provided by some philosophers regarding this phenomenon of blended spirituality and religious syncretism. And I'll propose an alternative, which I'm calling pluralistic theism. But a lot of people that I've shown this work to are opposed to that label. So let's see in the Q&A if you have the same sentiment. So what's the project all about? Well, this is a work in progress. It was commissioned by the Cambridge Elements on global philosophy of religion. Hopefully I'll finish this because the deadline's in December. The series editor, of course, is our good friend from the University of, where is he now? Oklahoma / Birmingham, Eugene Nagasawa. So we've been talking about this for 2 years now. And there are two motivating strands of this work. So the first one is the recently concluded Philosophies of Appropriated Religions in Southeast Asia project, which was funded through a JDF, or the John Templeton Foundation, on the Global Philosophy of Religion project headed by Eugene. And of course, my recent work on the application of non-classical logics to the traditional problems in the philosophy of religion. So what's the first strand? What's the motivating picture? So the motivating picture was given by the Global Philosophy of Religion project, which was headed by Eugene through the Birmingham Center of Philosophy of Religion. The Global Philosophy of Religion's main aim is to globalize philosophy of religion. That is, in terms of how to incorporate multiple religious perspectives into the conceptual framework of the discipline. So that's the basic idea, and I put Victoria's work as a criticism of that point of view. Not really a criticism, but more of some suggestions of improving. Yeah. So the thought behind this project is the more philosophical resources we have, the greater the chances of making progress in the traditional problems of philosophy of religion. So what are those problems? Perhaps problems like the nature of the divine, the immortality of the soul, life after death, and the problem of evil and suffering. So these are the themes of the Global Philosophy of Religion project. And what was my project? Well, my project was to explore the emerging philosophies of religion in Southeast Asia. So this is a smaller part of the bigger project of global philosophy of religion. So we're focusing on philosophies of religion in the region of Southeast Asia. So the team includes me and my friend from Thailand, Chulalongkorn University, Sauraj Hangladerom, and some other scholars from the region. So we've been talking about this. I think the project started in 2021. It just ended early this year. So it's still fresh, quote unquote. And our main output is a book coming out next month, published by Springer, Philosophies of Appropriated Religions. I'll talk about what appropriated religions are later, but for now, the basic idea is to show how the theoretical resources of the appropriated religions in the region can help advance discussions in the philosophy of religion. So that's one strand that's motivating this project. The other strand is my recent work on the intersection of logic and the philosophy of religion. So I'm fond of logic. I'm a logician by training, and I'm looking at applications of various kinds of logic to specific problems in the philosophy of religion. So for example, we've been talking about this a while ago, Victoria, the paradox of the stone, paradox of omnipotence, paradox of omnibenevolence, and so on and so forth. So name your favorite paradox in the philosophy of religion, apply some non-classical logic, and that's a project that I've been doing since 2019. All right, so my key aim there is to explore how developments in formal logic, specifically non-classical logics, gaps, gluts, FDE, whatever logic you may think of, how those logics may inform the current discussions in the philosophy of religion. But my aim in this talk is not philosophy of religion per se, at least not the traditional philosophy of religion. My aim is to offer a framework, which I'm calling pluralistic theism, as a viable explanation, philosophical explanation for the phenomenon of blended spirituality. I'm not sure if you know this, but I'll talk about what that means later, and syncretic religiosity, which is found in Southeast Asia in particular, but it's found everywhere, as you'll see. So what's this blended spirituality? Right. If you're a fan of Harry Potter or some pop culture icons, perhaps you're doing some blended rationality now. Sorry, blended spirituality now. Why? Because blended spirituality is just remix religiosity. And this book, cited by a lot of people in the literature, Strange Rites by Tara Burton, talks about this phenomenon, current phenomenon, and how we view religiosity, how we view spirituality. So what's blended spirituality? Well, it's a religion for the nuns. So what are the nuns? The nuns are no creed, no religion, no doctrine. Basically, your millennial or your yuppies. I don't know yuppies. Yuppies were born in the 70s. Gen Z, no, we're not concerned about Gen X. We're concerned about millennials like me and Gen Z people. All right, so this is a kind of religion decoupled from institutions, from creeds, from metaphysical truth claims about God or the universe or the way things are. But that still seeks in various and varying ways to provide us the pillars of what religion always has: meaning, purpose, community, rituals. Okay? So it's a kind of, to use continental philosopher, religion without religion. It's kind of religion for the non-religious, secularists, like most of the young ones in our midst. Okay. But the idea of remixed religiosity or blended spirituality is nothing new. It has been explored even before. And it's the idea there is remixed religiosity came from the idea of religious syncretism. So what's religious syncretism? It's the idea of partial or wholesale blending of varying and often conflicting religious doctrines and rituals. Okay. Although this term is typically used to describe forms of religious practice that combine elements from different traditions, it can also refer to the blending of beliefs and practices within a single tradition. Okay. For example, this is a bit controversial, especially now, what's going on in other parts of the world. Islam is supposed to be a syncretic religion. It's a blending of Arabian paganism, Judaism, and a bit of Christianity. It's not a unique religion. It came from somewhere. It came from the Arabs, the pagans, the Jews, and the Christians. Christianity, as we all know, came from a lot of sources. It came from Judaism and the Greco-Roman religions. So it's a blending of those things, like what's going on now, right? Most of us have icons, like the K-pop icons. Right? That's our new religion, at least for some K-pop fans here. You're a fan. Okay, so yeah, there's a kind of religiosity going around, but it's been old. The idea of syncretic religions, okay, or blended religions is an old idea. Islam, Christianity has that. So let's focus on religions in Southeast Asia. Right. Here's a stat I got from Pew, I think that's the website. So religions in Southeast Asia 2020. I was a bit surprised that Islam dominates this. Okay? 40% are Islam in Southeast Asia. Buddhists are 28% of the total population of Southeast Asia. Christianity is just third, and other religions here. However, what's unique about Southeast Asia is the fact that these religions are not native to the region. Christianity, obviously, is not found in Southeast Asia. It's found somewhere else. Okay, so it's a kind of religion which was assimilated by the cultures that embrace it. So that's what we mean by appropriated in our previous project. It was something that previous generations perhaps were, because they're colonized by Christians or Islams or whatever, they embraced those religions as part of their milieu, cultural milieu, and eventually became their standard religion or their official religion. But these religions are not native to those regions. However, it is not uncommon for Southeast Asians to blend varying religious doctrines and rituals. Much like most of us here, perhaps, have a blending of different religious beliefs and practices. For example, many Buddhists in the region of Southeast Asia, and perhaps in Asia in general, still believe in ghosts of local folklore. This is a finding that some Malaysians found in their in the research that they gave us for the project. Likewise, Christians and Muslims still engage in Hindu and Chinese rituals. For example, even though we're Christians, some Catholics in the Philippines burn their dead, cremate their dead, but that's not a Catholic practice. Okay? So there's a kind of blending of practices and beliefs as well. However, this leads to a kind of philosophical problem if you think about it. And this is what the project is all about. The current project that I'm working on is all about. So here's the idea. Each religion embodies a unique set of beliefs and practices. Perhaps they are homogeneous, quite unique to a specific religion. And these sets of beliefs and practices might be incompatible with other religions, right? That is, they might be logically contradicting. Now, syncretic religions, as we have seen, blend different sets of religious beliefs and practices. So, syncretic religions might have incompatible beliefs and practices. Not just incompatible, but perhaps logically contradicting beliefs. For example, let's talk about the conception of the divine. Some religions, like Islam, Christianity, are monotheistic. There's just one divine being. Other religions are polytheistic, arguably different varieties of Hinduism or polytheistic. There's more than one divine being. And other religions are non-theistic. So it's not really atheistic, but non-theistic. There's no divine being. Some say Buddhism is that kind of religion. However, if we have certain syncretic religions, what can we say about a Buddhist Christian? A Buddhist who practices some Christian rituals or beliefs, or a Christian who practices some Buddhist practices or have Buddhist beliefs. Is that person contradicting herself? For example, Victoria. No. Okay. But yeah, you think about it, we have people who have different sets of beliefs, and those are quote unquote contradicting beliefs. Now, a qualification that I need to make is between inter-contradictory doctrines and intra-doctrinal contradictions. So intra-contradictions are contradictions within a given religion. So for example, Christianity espouse a kind of contradiction. Like J.C. Beale would say, the doctrine of the dual nature of Christ is contradictory. So within Christianity, like the Catholic religion or whatever Christian variety, so long as it believes the dual nature of Christ, involve a kind of intra-doctrinal contradiction. On the other hand, you have inter-contradictions because you have different doctrines. So these are contradictions that arise because of some syncretism among the religions or some blending among the religions. Okay, so that's a problem with me so far. Okay. So you might say this is a silly question to ask, but well, philosophers have been asking silly questions for the longest time. But what do theologians say about this phenomenon of religious syncretism or blended spirituality or remixed religiosity and so on? Many theologians hate the idea of blended spirituality or remixed religiosity or syncretic religions. Why? Because it has a promiscuous pedigree. It's anathema. Don't talk about Islams who are Christians. There's only one true religion and so on. So for these people, for these theologians, synthetic religions cannot be authentic expressions of faith. So that's a hardcore theologian. On the other hand, some theologians adopt a more flexible way of thinking about syncretic religions, and they'll say, well, they're useful for missionary purposes. They're adaptive mechanisms that, well, missionaries use to proclaim the word of whatever. Like when the Jesuits came to Asia, they transformed themselves into Asians, quote unquote. So syncretic religiosity, remixing your religion, blending your religion to fit the culture is one of the mechanisms used by missionaries to spread the word. On the other hand, there's the more practical people who say, well, as a matter of historical fact, all religions are syncretic. since they all stem from multiple ancestral traditions. Okay, so that's another sort of, well, perhaps a sociologist slash theologian will say this. Anthropologists will say, well, there's no true Christian, there's no true Islam, or there's no true whatever, because all those religions stem from somewhere, came from some cultural background. So all religions are syncretic. But we're not concerned about what theologians say. Forget about theology. We're not in, hey, wait, we are in the religious studies program. No offense to the people here, but if we were philosophers, yeah, we could appreciate what theologians are saying, but we're concerned about the philosophical explanation, the foundational. Okay, what would philosophers say about this phenomenon? That is, how should we account for religious syncretism philosophically? Now, is religious syncretism just contradictory? Sorry for the typo. Or does it point to a many but one, or a one but many conception of religiosity? Okay. Now, any explanation, any philosophical explanation of this phenomena, I think, should abide by two desiderata. Two things are desired for good philosophical explanation of the phenomena. And I think the two are, first, the adequacy to the data. So if it is a philosophical explanation, it must admit the existence of syncretic religions, because it tries to explain that, perhaps reductively, perhaps eliminatively, or whatever. So long as you say that, well, I'm trying to account for syncretic religions, even if they imply contradictions. Okay? So the adequacy of your explanation to the data, of course, is very important. Another thing, perhaps most of you won't like this, but I think one desiderata of any philosophical explanation would be a worry-free metaphysics. Okay? That is, unless it is necessary, Occam's razor, the philosophical explanation must not appeal to some metaphysically suspect entities. Unless it's necessary. Right? If it is, then perhaps let's talk about that later. All right, I'll focus on two particular philosophical theories, which were proposed in the 70s, 80s, okay, that try to explain this kind of phenomenon, Socratic religiosity, or blended spirituality. I'll focus on Ninian Smart's philosophy of worldviews and John Hick's religious pluralism. By the way, Ninian Smart was the brother, I think, of Jack Smart, JJC Smart. If you don't know, now you know. Philosopher of mind and the analytic philosopher, the grumpy old man of Australian philosophy. I met him, by the way, before he died, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, so philosophy of worldviews and religious pluralism. So let's talk about Smart's idea. Smart was a very smart guy, and he's into anthropology, sociology. He looks at religion not as qua religion, rather as an artifact, a human artifact, and an artifact which he calls a worldview. Okay. So he expounded the idea since the 70s, but I'm focusing on these three particular works. So here are the basic ideas of the philosophy of worldviews for Smart. First, all religions are worldviews. That is, they are systems of attitudes, beliefs, values, and practices, that an individual or group of people have toward the universe and life. Now, for Smart, religious syncretism is a fact. That's a historical fact. The merging of different faiths or worldviews is not only a logical possibility. We find that there's historical evidence for that. There's artifactual data. By the way, Smart would like the idea that in the Philippines, when you look at old churches, I'm not sure if you know this, Jeremy. If you look at the old churches, the 16th century churches in the Philippines, the statues there look like Chinese dragons. The saints, the murals of the saints, they look Chinese than European Caucasian. Why? Because Chinese slaves built those churches, painted those murals. They appropriated the Western or the Spanish idea of sainthood and whatnot, or church in the Philippines. Never mind. So there's an artifactual data. There's some artifacts that cause into view that, well, religions are really worldviews. They're systems of beliefs, attitudes, and so on. And what's the task of the philosopher? Well, the task of the philosopher is to clarify and present the criteria for determining the truth between worldviews. So that's the job of a philosopher. Okay, so we accept that religions are worldviews. That's a human artifact. Okay, but we need to check what's the truth behind the worldviews or between the worldviews. And Smart proposed a really interesting way of thinking about the criteria of the truth religion. And he uses logic of all criteria. It talks about the internal logical coherence of a religion or a worldview. And worldviews must be evaluated in terms of mutual consistency with other worldviews. Okay. And we should check the implied metaphysics, epistemology, ethical and social theory of each worldview. Now, if it passes a religion or worldview passes the coherency test, the consistency test, and the implication test, then that's a good worldview, quote and unquote. Now, the upshots of this philosophy, of this explanation, is that this evaluative tool presents a worry-free metaphysics. It just talks about internal coherence, mutual consistency, implications, and so on of a theory. And it provides a way of choosing and judging worldviews without positing metaphysically suspect entities. However, it rules out incoherent syncretic religions. Because for Smart, perhaps Buddhist Christians would be incoherent, or at least mutually inconsistent, since Buddhism implies non-theism, while Christianity implies monotheism. And those two things are mutually contradictory. So for Smart, I think he'll rule out those things. Syncretic religions, which imply contradictions, will be ruled out. Full stop. But syncretic religions, which are, well, compatible perhaps in the logical sense, might figure in his true worldviews. All right, let's look at John Hick's theory. Well, I think we're all familiar with John Hick because we are in a Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies. Hick's theory of religious pluralism was expounded on many papers and books, but I'm looking at 4 particular works here, especially this one, The Problems of Religious Pluralism. So I think I'm following Eugene Nakasawa's take on John Hick's idea. So for Hick, there's a pluralism thesis and there's a global theology thesis. So the pluralism thesis is just the idea that the great world faiths embody different perceptions and conceptions of, and correspondingly different responses to the real. I'm highlighting the real because Hick highlights that. Now, by putting their different reports together, we could attain a much fuller account of the divine nature. So different perspectives. Yeah, there's a plurality of views about the real. And these views, okay, when we put them together, we could attain a much fuller account of the divine nature. So what are the upshots of this view? Well, this means that despite having diverse and often metaphysically conflicting claims, all religions have the same epistemic standing. That's why I like the fair advent idea. Right? All picture, right? We have different pictures of the divine, the real. And all of these have the same epistemic standing. They are all but our attempts to understand an ineffable transcendental reality. So these world religions are our responses to the real, the postulated ground of the different forms of religious experience. So for Hick, I think at the onset, he'll say, yeah, syncretic religions, even contradictory ones, which smart bars, are considered as a different form of religious experience of the real for Hick. However, here's the controversial part of Hick's theory, his view that these things, these different perspectives of the real, would lead us to a global theology. So the project here of global theology will be the attempt to use these different affirmations and modes of religious experience in which they are based as data for the construction of a comprehensive religious theories. Such a theology would consist of a body of hypotheses about the nature of reality, expressing the basic common ground of world religions, and receiving mystic expressions and devotional content in different ways within different historical traditions. But they're all talking about the same thing, the real. So if we have all these things, all these reports, perhaps there's progress. I'm not sure. Okay? But we're inching closer and closer to the truth of the divine nature. That's the idea of Hick. Hick's point is that different religions are overlapping aspects of the same ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is, of course, metaphysically suspect. And that's a criticism I have Hick's point. So we have two views, two philosophical explanations of syncretic religiosity. You have the smart anthropological view, okay? But it rules out syncretic religions which imply contradictions. On the other hand, you have Hick's religious pluralism, which accepts syncretic religions, even if they imply contradictions, but you have that metaphysically suspect thing known as the ultimate reality or the real. So what happens now? That means that given this desiderata that we started out with, adequacy to the data and a very free metaphysics, you'll have this table. Okay? So the worldview's philosophy, okay, will rule out syncretic religiosity if they imply contradictions. So it's really not adequate to the data that we have because, yes, syncretic religions which imply contradictions do exist. Okay? But it's a very free metaphysics. On the other hand, which is pluralism, as I've said, okay, is adequate to the data, but it implies kind of very some metaphysics, a metaphysics of the real. Given this, I think neither Smart nor Hick provide a satisfactory explanation of the phenomenon we're trying to explain. So an alternative explanation must be sought. At least that's my. I think most of the people I gave the draft of this paper to, they reacted, no, you're wrong. And they provide the reasons. Of course, like Eugene has complained that perhaps Hick has a solution for this one. Whatever. Okay, but I think there's an opening, a gap that we could fill. And that's where this idea of pluralistic theism came to be. So the basic idea here is that there are different and equally correct conceptions of the divine. A la Hick, a la Smart. And conjoining these conceptions might imply a logical contradiction. But so what? This need not worry us. This part here will be the controversial part, which I'll try to develop in the next few minutes. Okay. And here's the analogy that I'll be using. For those who are familiar with logic, there's a view in the literature and philosophical logic known as logical pluralism. So pluralistic theism borrows a lot from logical pluralism. Yeah, and I discussed this with JC, Beal. So the idea behind logical pluralism is just the thought that there is more than one correct logic. I would like to highlight this part, the correct logic. Because what they mean when they say, oh, Beal and Restel are famously the people who propose logical pluralism. But the idea is just simple. There are many equally valid accounts of logical consequence, of what it means for a conclusion to follow from the premises. Okay. So here's a practical illustration. There are many logics. We all know this. You might not know it, but yes, there are many logics. Aside from your beloved classical logic, which hates contradictions, you have other logics who love contradictions. Some of these logics, like classical logic, accept modus ponens. Jeremy, I'll show you what modus ponens is. Or I will have. There's a. Never mind. Okay, modus ponens is just the inference from a conditional. If P then Q, affirm P, you'll have Q. That's modus ponens. Classical logic, the logic that we're teaching to our students. It's the wrong logic, by the way. Never mind. Yeah, it's a good logic to play around it. It accepts modus ponens, but other logics, like the logical paradox, rejects it. Okay? I love modus ponens. It's useful. Okay? But I won't stick my head out and say it's always valid. I just love it in some reasoning. Some logics are better at accounting for certain types of reasoning than others. For example, the logical paradox has a better account of reasoning about contradictions than classical logic. Classical logic, as you all know, would say, from a contradiction, anything follows. That's the principle of explosion. Okay? So classical logic will have that as a principle. Logical paradox won't have it. They'll say, well, there are contradictions, but they won't lead to all conclusions or to any conclusions whatsoever. That is, for example, if I say that this pen is black and this pen is not black, that's a contradiction. From that contradiction, you'll say that Jeremy is the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. That's false, by the way. But it follows given the contradiction according to classical logic. Okay, but for the logical paradox and other non-classical logics, which controls the contradictions, what contradictions do to your inferences, they'll say, well, we could bar what contradictions are doing in your inferences. So that's the idea of logical pluralism. Some logics are good at hunting certain types of phenomenon, reasoning phenomenon, and others are better at hunting for it. And there's no one true logic because each phenomenon has a unique logical explanation, perhaps. Analogously, so here's the argument that I'm making for pluralistic theism. There are different conceptions of the divine, of what it means to be God or whatever. And some of these conceptions are consistent, okay, traditional, non-syncretic religions. Others may imply inconsistencies, example, some varieties of syncretic religions. And there are metaphysically worrisome, example, Hicks, and inconsistency-bearing explanations like smart, but there can also be metaphysically worry-free and inconsistency-friendly explanation of these syncretic religions. And that's what pluralistic theism is trying to give. So what's the thesis? The thesis is that this kind of explanation presents a para-consistent explanation of what's going on in understanding syncretic religions and religions in general. Because religious beliefs and practices can be consistent or inconsistent, and our logic of the divine is para-consistent. It is not explosive, right? It does not permit that all contradictions lead to conclusions. That is, inconsistent beliefs need not make the whole system of beliefs untrue or untenable. So our logic need not be dialectic. That is, it accepts two contradictions. Okay. I'm not for dialecticism. I love paraconsistency, okay, but there are no real contradictions. So the upshot of this kind of explanation is that there can be Buddhist Christians, Muslim Judaists, controversial right now, and Hindu Confucians, and so on. There's nothing wrong with those beliefs and practices. If you subscribe to Buddhism and Christianity, no worries. Whatever makes you happy. Okay, so I see two possible objections. And these objections are, well, I'm still thinking about them really, but I see two objections. One is theoretical, one is practical. First one is theoretical in terms of its ad hocness. And this is something that some serious theologians accuse analytic theologians of. Analytic philosophers who come in theology or philosophers who come in theology are not doing theology because they're doing ad hoc things with their philosophies in order to explain theology. And there's a practical objection, which is it's impossible, practically impossible. So let's look at the objections. So the thought behind objection one is that pluralistic theism is ad hoc. Okay, because Buddhist Christians, Muslim Judaists, and Hindu Confucians are inherently contradictory. You can't have those things. If we accept them, then we might as well accept that there are square circles and golden mountains. Typo. Okay. Objection two. Pluralistic theism is too good to be true. Having Buddhist Christians, Muslim Judaists, and Hindu Confucians might sound good in theory, but can they really exist in the actual world? Are they really Buddhist Christians? Are they Buddhist to some extent, but Confucians or Christians to some another extent? Here's my response to objection one. I'll just say, why fear contradictions? That is, yes, monotheism, polytheism, and non-theism are contradictory conceptions of the divine. But why can't they coexist at the same time? What bars the idea that there can be no and be many or just one divine being? Because one is not zero and zero is not three. Yeah. So possible consistency-friendly explanations for the contradictory conceptions of the divine. Example, the qua-solutions or relative to solutions available in the market of ideas do exist. But there can also be inconsistent friendly explanations, i.e. the thing that I'm talking about here. Now you might say, that makes monotheism and polytheism meaningless. Nope. just means that, well, you don't have an in principle way of saying that they're contradictory. That's the question. Okay, so my reply to objection 2, the practical impossibility, is that, well, as a matter of fact, there are Buddhist Christians, Muslim Judaists, and Hindu Confucians. They're practicing, they're alive and well. So some of my Thai friends are Buddhist, but they do practice and believe Christian doctrines. Now, some of them are good people, others are bad. Others are not so good. Okay, but some people are hardcore religious fanatics who do not tolerate remixed people or other people of a different creed. So, wouldn't we have a better world if we all understood each other's religious commitments? Well, that's the cheesy side of my answer, but the kumbaya side of my answer. But actually, if you think about it, practical problem is really a big problem if we're serious about syncretism, because syncretism is here, but how do we account for it? Or perhaps how do we explain away this kind of phenomenon? Some concluding remarks. We're good in time, right? Yeah, okay. Cool. This is only a sketch of a view. It's a picture. It might not be the picture you're hoping for, might not even be a good picture, but it's a picture, an explanation that we will offer vis-a-vis Smart's and Hicks' explanation of syncretic religiosity. And I think if the picture is correct, then we have a way to philosophically explain syncretic religions and blended spirituality. Thanks very much. So if you're interested in my work, salamat. And here are the references I use for the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as per usual, I'm going to try my best to moderate the Q&A by attending both to potential comments via the Zoom call that some people are tuning in from and the room itself. I can start filling up a queue if people want to raise their hands. Okay, just making my pen died at the exact moment. Oh, no, it's back. Okay. Sorry, keep those raised if you could. Okay. Seeing quite a few from the room itself, not yet from the Zoom chat, but I'll keep checking back. So we can start then with Nevia, and I will get you a microphone for the benefit of... Did you? You know what? I think it's because you were poorly placed for my line of vision, but...
Thank you, JJ. As you may know, I'm not working in the philosophy of religion, and I'm not a logician, but these are topics that really attracts me a lot. So I've been thinking about the notion of syncretism in religion for like accidental personal reasons. And so my view of a syncretic religion is a little bit different from the way in which you have been using this term here. I think of the Baha'i religion, which is a syncretistic religion in the sense that it is a dogmatic claim of the religion itself that there is one God, but there are many manifestations of that very one God. So the Christian God is one of the manifestations of a God. The Islamic God is one manifestation of God, and the same applies to all the religions that can be historically given at a certain time along the human life. Now, this is the idea of a syncretism that I have in mind. And it seems to me that there may be, I only am aware of the Baha'i religion, but maybe there are even other religions that are syncretistic in this way. Whereas the way in which you use syncretism here is a much broader sense of the term, I believe. And it relates to the fact that religions may actually stem out from, we can trace back religions to different religious frameworks or traditions. In this sense, in this like broader, looser sense, I believe that perhaps every possible religion we can think of is a syncretistic religion. If you think of the role of, say, Orphism in, say, the monotheistic religions that we have in Europe, that gives you like a case for tracing back religions to, you know, any other form of religious tradition. So in my view, the way in which you're using syncretism in your work is this broad sense can be applied to any religion, including syncretistic religions, such as the Baha'i religion. Along the same line, the notion of appropriated religion also, to me, is maybe problematic unless more specifically defined, because of the evangelism that is probably a character, a trait of every religion. Perhaps every religion can also be said an appropriated religion. So these are my like. So now I also have a very short question as just you know, someone that knows nothing on the topic. Why shall we care of logical coherence in religions? Is it really something that matters, given that religions are there to try to make sense of our life that has so clear limitations, or even our thought that is also limited to make sense of the great mysteries surrounding existence? So in a way, there's something that is embedded in a religious thinking that asks to go beyond logic. So why shall we care of internal logical coherence of religions?
Yeah, thanks, Nevio. Interesting questions. Let's start with the last one. Why I care about logical coherence? It's not my view. It's Ninian Smart's view, but I think there's a pull, because we equate rationality with certain ideas of logical coherence. So if some body of doctrine, religious or otherwise, imply kind of logical incoherence, and then it's irrational. Now you might say, well, that's part of religion. Religion must be irrational because it's a matter of faith. Well, some medieval philosophers would not like that answer, because they think that faith and rationality are mutually compatible. But that's an aside. I think the idea is that rationality should imply a minimal sense of logical coherence. I oppose that, as you can see. Logical coherence does not really promote rationality. There are different ways of thinking about that. But I like the bit about syncretism. Like, yeah, I agree. So I'm using the term syncretism in a very broad sense, such that there's a mixing of religions. If that mixing leads to another religion, like the Baha'i religion, that mixes all those traditional religions into one, yeah, I'll call that a syncretic religion. But this means that within the Baha'i religion, it will have some contradictions in its doctrines. So I'm interested in that. Now, Yeah, so I'm using the term syncretism in like how theologians have used it in the literature. So I'm just using it as a matter of it's defined as partial or wholesale mixing of doctrines and practices among religions. And yeah, so to some extent, I agree with some theologians when they say all religions are syncretic because all religions came from somewhere and there's a mixing of things. But I'm not interested in that historical fact. I'm interested in the logical consequences of that view, or at least the philosophical consequences of that view. In terms of the appropriated, yeah, actually, my editor asked me about that too, because there's a connotation that appropriated means cultural appropriation, which is a bad word for Americans. You're not American. That's good. Okay. Americans. So I'm just using the term loosely here. So appropriated just means assimilation by cultural assimilation. And it's positively taken. We all have. Yeah, but to some extent, yeah, that's true. It will be a trivial thesis. However, what's interesting about looking at appropriated religions is how that leads to some philosophical questions. Like, if there's a Malaysian practice, a burial practice that mixes Chinese elements and Islamic elements and Buddhist elements, what's going on there? What's their view of afterlife? What's their view of immortality of the soul and so on? Or is there some conflict that's going on in their worldview? Yeah. So that I'm interested here. Yeah, but thanks for your questions.
Okay, I'm going to get you a microphone, Luke.
All right. Well, thanks again for the talk. That's terrific. Really enjoyed this. Couple of like sort of softball questions, I suppose. I really appreciate this religious syncretism aspect here, but do I get it that you're disagreeing with what was his name? Smart, out of a sense that, you know, of course his what was it? His view is that it's the worldviews are not adequate to the data, right? Does Smart have kind of like an Anglophone standard for how things are supposed to measure up? Is that one of the main objections then?
For the internal coherence.
So how is that measured? How is an internal coherence of a worldview measured? That's my question.
Coherence in a
Okay.
If the view was the anarchy.
I see. So he's like classical logic kind of thing. All right, and you're positing something else. So I will then call attention to like the I guess from my perspective, the uniquely Filipino aspect of this. So my perspective or my background is I'm Catholic by some degree or whatever, and I'm dating a Filipino girl who is also Catholic. But American Catholic is very different than Filipino Catholic, as I have found. So upon realizing, oh, so there are duende and capre, and I need to worry about these, and these are important now. I say, oh, well, this is heresy. And then I go when I go to get communion and they go, oh, the way you do the cross, you're Orthodox. And I go, oh, okay, I guess I'm not Catholic either. You know, you sort of see this perspective. So the notion that these religions are syncretic is, yeah, like this seems like a given. So where is the there? You know, it seems kind of obvious that religions are syncretic in some regard.
Yeah, so if I like the story about Duende and Capre. Duende are dwarves in little mystical beings.
By my word for that would be like, oh, you have earthbound immortal. Well, like, what do you mean? This doesn't make sense. Are there chthonics in Christianity?
Yeah, so that kind of religious practice or religious belief, that's interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, because Jeremy, he's from the English department, but he works on Filipino literature on this one, especially Gothic Philippine literature. Yeah, so because those mythical elements are part of our old,
Of course.
pre-Hispanic culture. Now, your question is, well, it's trivial that there are syncretic religions in that respect. But I'm interested in the logical consequence, metaphysical consequences, epistemic consequences of that view.
Mm.
So if your girlfriend believes in Duende and she believes in God, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, where does that Duende fit in that worldview? You know,
Yeah.
can we have a coherent story there, or is it mutually exclusive? That Duendes, if you believe in God, you should not believe in those things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the syncreticity of that brings in the question is there a true Catholicism, or are we both heretics, or is there two separate third things?
Let's ask the Pope.
All right. We're gonna pull double duty there.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, but kidding aside, yeah, there's a strict Catholic doctrine.
Sure.
That we need to abide by.
Yeah.
So if you believe in, if you cremate your dead,
Yeah, that was the other thing that surprised me. Is, oh, you're cremating your grandfather? What? You know?
yeah, if you cremate your dead, that's blasphemous. That's a heresy in Catholic doctrine. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Another example.
Mm. Yeah, that's another syncretic practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I guess final question then is on this line of why fear contradictions. Well, really, I think it's more a question of why and when do we permit them? That's the metaphysically important point.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, cool. I like that. So why, when and where can we permit contradictions? Let me just clarify the question. Permit in what sense? Permit in our reasoning?
Yeah. Well, let's say like according to the data, right? You know, because we're sort of contrasting with what was his name? Hicks' view, right? Is when and why do we permit or does a syncretic religion permit a contradiction?
Let me just talk about non-syncretic religions. For example, I'm a Catholic.
Yeah.
I love Catholics. I'm a born and raised Catholic. I love the doctrine of the dual nature of Christ.
Yeah, 100% both.
Not just 100%. If he's not purely human and purely divine, that he's not Christ. So that's the view. But of course, that implies a contradiction, as we know.
Right.
So people like J.C. Gill, who else? My co-author, Michael DeVito, would say, well, we need to accept those things as part of the doctrine. Now, because that makes the religion, Catholic religion, mysterious. That's where the faith part comes in. Now, what does that entail with inter-doctrinal contradictions, like Buddhist Christianity or Islam Judaist? Now, what will happen there? That's the thing about syncretic religiosity. Perhaps there's a kind of individualism here, or at least little social groups that's not really mainstream. You don't see Buddhist Christians around making fellowships. They don't celebrate masses. It's a way of life, perhaps. So it's individualistic, okay, or a little community. It's not really a religion in that sense. So what I'm saying is that they're concerned about coherence of their belief. Well, I like this practice because I'm a Buddhist, perhaps, because it gives me what's that? What's the Buddhist chakra? Yeah, the thing that yeah. And I believe Christianity because it gives me
Grace or whatever you want to call it.
everlasting life. Yeah.
You promise me that.
Hi. Okay, so yeah, but now you ask, what happens to your belief if you believe in whatever nirvana or reincarnation? Okay, then you have that afterlife with God.
Seems contradictory if you say it that way. Yeah. So how does it square? Because apparently people square it, right? That's the data showing. People
square it, people practice it, people believe it wholeheartedly. So I'm not explaining why. I'm just explaining that here's a framework that it could say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Because some people would say, that's incoherent, that's contradictory. So I'm just borrowing that conclusion. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks very much.
Could you pass the microphone down to Jeremy?
Thanks for your talk, JJ. I would have really wanted to go first because as JJ revealed in his talk, I'm not a philosopher, but I do have a lot of friends who are philosophers, so don't worry. I would have wanted to go first to be able to ask the stupid questions, and if you don't mind, I'll ask those stupid questions anyway. It seems like you, Nebia and Luke are having some kind of conversation, so you obviously are understanding each other. And you've talked to me about your work before, which, I only pretended to understand. But this one, I can actually get a little sense of what you're trying to do. But I guess my first question is this, though. You've mentioned several times that syncretic religions imply contradiction. And I'm wondering if you're like overstating the case, because a lot of world religions have overlap, maybe more than difference. So which made me think like what you mean by the word contradiction, which comes up a lot and which I think is central to the argument that you're making, because in some sense you use it in the logical sense. Other times you use it to mean doctrinal incompatibility. So I wonder what you mean by contradiction then, and if or you use it in also as a syncretic sense, appropriately so, to mean both, and maybe even more than what I've mentioned. If that's the case, I wonder too if your framework is able to account for concepts such as belief and faith. And I use this in a more general rather than philosophical sense, I suppose. When I'm in a room full of philosophers, I use words like truth, good, faith. I get very paranoid because I'm not sure if they really mean anything now. But I mean it in like a more general sense. I say this being an atheist, or actually, more precisely, a Christian atheist, if that. Which is more interesting, which strongly implies contradiction more than religions, if you think about it. And so, I wonder though if contradiction is in fact inherent in religious discourse, and in fact, notions of contradiction enables or operationalizes things like belief and faith. Because as someone who's atheist, who has a lot of religious friends, I'm a target of often forced conversion, right? They try to win me back, and one way of defending myself is to point out contradictions in scripture, right? Like, how about this? Like, what can you say about this contradiction? So contradiction becomes a tool to kind of defend myself from them. And then I think anyone who has studied a basic literature course and has read scripture as literature would immediately notice that scriptural text read as literature will reveal a lot of contradictions. Genesis, Job, name whatever. But if read as scripture, those contradictions are glossed over, right? For some reason, like they don't see contradiction if they read the same text as scripture. So what I'm saying is that it might be inbuilt in the form of the text itself. That is, if you are talking about contradiction in the scriptural and doctrinal sense, rather than not strictly in the logical sense that I sometimes think you're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks.
That
Jeremy.
long-winded question makes sense. Thank you.
It does. And I love that there are non-philosophers in the audience because I have a chance to explain logic to non-philosophers.
I am sorry, everyone.
So I'll use the whiteboard. Okay. Just a short review of logic for the benefit of our friend from the English department. Okay, so your question is about contradictions and how it relates to belief and faith. Right? But what contradictions do I have in mind in this talk? So I talked about logical incoherence, logical contradictions, okay? But actually contradictions come in many types. They have many, let's say, features. There are different kinds of contradictions. So the thing that we are not really after is a contradiction of the form A and not A per se. We're not concerned about this because this is a typical contradiction. This is a contradiction parlance. Okay. We're not concerned about this type of contradiction in this talk. What am I concerned with? Let's call this strict logical contradiction. Okay. I'm more concerned about quote unquote extra logical contradictions. Extra logical contradictions which arise from theological doctrines, beliefs, etc. So like the dual nature of Christ, that Christ is human, Christ is divine. Okay, then you make some implications about humanity. Christ being human, he's mutable, he can change. Christ being divine is immutable. So you have your theological contradiction there. So this is a contradiction which I'm calling intra-doctrinal contradiction. So it's a contradiction within a specific religion. Okay. I'm interested there, but I'm more interested in what I'm calling inter-doctrinal contradictions. That is contradictions that happen between religions. If I have commitment to Buddhism, for example, so this is the sorry. So the contradictions I'm concerned with are what I'm calling inter-doctrinal contradictions. So these are contradictions that are implied by different religious doctrines from different religions. For example, if I'm a Buddhist, I also believe in non-theism perhaps, or a reincarnation. So those are part of the doctrine, the dogma of Buddhism. So it implies certain things like, yeah, so I'll just use the non-theism view. Now, if you're a Christian, that implies a kind of monotheistic view. So my question is, what happens to a Buddhist who's a Christian? Does he or she believe both that there's no divine being and there's at least one, exactly one divine being? That's a logical that's an interdoctrinal contradiction that arises from those two beliefs. So that I'm concerned with that. Okay. Your point about reading scripture, okay, as literature, or as scripture. Yeah, some theologians, some philosophers say that this thing here, the intra-doctrinal contradiction that happens concerning the dual nature of Christ, is actually a real contradiction, and you need a kind of faith, okay, a leap of faith to embrace this kind of contradiction. So contradictions lead to faith. I think who said that? I forget if it's Irenaeus, one of the old medieval philosophers, who said, the mystery of Christ's dual nature is part and parcel of our faith. That's why I think it's, Tertullian. That's Tertullian's paradox in philosophy. So yeah, some say contradictions imply faith, or we need faith in order to understand this kind of contradiction. Yeah, but I'm not really interested in that, at least for this project. I'm more interested with this kind of, which I'm calling interdoctrinal, or doctrinal contradictions implied by syncretic religions. Yeah, thanks. Does it help? It does not.
So I believe, Christos, you were next. Is that right?
Okay, speaking of what we call the intro contradiction here, I'll give you one example. It's a book which got popular many years ago in the United States, written by Paul Nita. And I think you know the book. It's called Without the Buddha, I Couldn't Be a Christian. And Nita himself was also Catholic theologian. He used to be actually a Catholic priest. And I remember when the book came out and people call it spiritual promiscuity. You see, it's kind of a lot of skepticism of that, because you can tell that there's a blending of what we call this actually kind of a monotheistic religion with something which is absolutely, non-theistic. So how can, but still, if you read book, you see this kind of blending, or we can call it kind of a new syncretistic religion, would be quite different from a kind of syncretism you talk about, like say early Christian. Talk about the emerging of Christianity as kind of syncretism, talk about, the combine of Judaism with what we call, Hellenization of the early Greek tradition. The gospel, according to John, is a typical example. We see the syncretistic religion, of course, with the follow some other heretic tradition, like we say something we might call Gnostic Christians. You see a lot of Greek traditions there, but that kind of syncretism, I think, they still like, you can see that people try to use different culture, because of the historical reason, they try to come up with some kind of a reconstruction of a new religion by borrowing different elements. But what Nietzsche tried to do here, like what maybe you want to about this kind of a blending today in the face of a so-called pluralism, or you say diversity, whatever. I'm just wondering, I don't know if you agree with me. Probably, we cannot really handle or approach this kind of phenomenon just from what we call logical coherence or not. We have to talk about, so what we might call the experiential dimension of the religion, because which is a really very important part of religious studies, which is really, I think, in that sense, I do believe a continental philosopher probably do better job than analytical one. Maybe I'm pretty against it. For example, like a phenomenology of religion, even Heidegger, when he talked about phenomenology of a religious life, he realized that you cannot philosophize religion, religious experience per se. You have to go back to the experience itself. So that's why, so I'm just wondering, what's your response on that?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, one of the referees of my proposal mentioned about a Vietnamese philosopher of religion who talks about Buddhism in Vietnam experientially. So I think the reviewer told me you should look into the experiences of individuals when you look at religion. I agree. And actually, in the rough draft of this piece, I looked into qualitative studies, phenomenological studies. That's why they're my backing for syncretism in religion, especially in Southeast Asia. A lot of Vietnamese Buddhists, they proclaim themselves as Buddhists, but actually they're more Christians. than Buddhist. So there's something interesting there. So they're experiencing their religion as Christian, but they're proclaiming in the world that they're Buddhist. So what's going on there? So there's a disparity between what's believed and what's practiced. So that's one of the findings that I'm looking at as well. So yeah, I totally agree. Analytic philosophers who are not attuned with sociological data, with phenomenological data, are doing bad philosophy. No, yeah, I agree. I totally agree, because especially if you're talking about real life experiences of real individuals, real people, we need to have a backup from just the social sciences, especially ethnography. I think I read some ethnographical studies of Buddhism in Thailand as well. So yeah, thanks very much. But I just wanted to talk about. I just have a comment on the heretic idea. Yeah, a lot of priests that I have consulted regarding this project jokingly tells me that I'm a heretic. I'm not doing Catholicism any favor in talking about this. But I have to agree. If you look at it from a specific religion, you look at this kind of project, you'll just say that's blasphemy. But what we want as philosophers of religion, as really interested in this kind of phenomena, you want to explain what's going on here. And I think this piece is trying to give an explanation. Hopefully it works. If not, then we need to rethink about this. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, thank you for the very interesting talk. I will try to raise an objection if it makes sense. I cannot make sense of a metaphysically worry-free explanation of a religion. So if there are interdoctrinal contradictions, as you said, I would understand this more as communities. I think you mentioned the term, rather than real religions. Maybe because of colonialism or because of family. So some people might be in the habit of practicing two religions that are contradicting, but maybe they do not really engage in these religions deeply. That doesn't mean that there cannot be religious syncretism. For example, I see much more in common between some mystical religions. For example, Muslim Sufis and Hasidic Jews, rather than Sufis and other Muslims. But I cannot see some, I don't know, like traditional Catholics practicing some other traditional form of religion.
Yeah.
So, I mean, can we still talk about religion at that time, at that point?
Wait, your comment about mysticism reminded me of, who's this guy? I forget his name, but he's one of those mystics in the older generation who talks about, if we think about religion, we should think about it in terms of mystic experiences. We can't talk about it conceptually, because if you conceive of it, it's no longer a product of faith, and faith-based religion should be, well, divinely revealed or whatever. So it's a kind of mystic experience. That's why I have to agree that mysticism in general, the mystics, not just Islamic mystics or Judaist mystics, including Catholic mystics or Christian mystics, and even Buddhist mystics, have that kind of shared religious experience, quote and unquote. However, there's also some anthropological data or psychological data that could explain that kind of phenomenon. That mysticism is just a kind of what's going on in your brain. That's why there's a shared mystical experience. Yeah, so at that level, I think I could have an alternative explanation why Sufis or this mystics have some kind of commonality rather than traditional religions and so on. But that's not the project. The project talks about doctrinal contradictions happening at the level of syncretic religions. I think that's the thing. But thanks about the mystics. I think there's something there, albeit I don't think that they have doctrines per se. Well, if you look at doctrines, because you could look at the scriptures of each religion, and each religion espouses a kind of set of dogmas. Like Christianity would have monotheism, life after death, and so on and so forth. Buddhism would have a different set of beliefs regarding those things. Muslims would have, but the question is, what happens to someone that has syncretic tendencies and embraces Christianity and Buddhism, so on. That's my concern. But I love the idea of mystics. They're different animal. No, not kidding. They're different breed of thing. I'm not sure how to explain that because it's no longer in the cognitive belief practice level. It's more of having a high, perhaps the high of being with God or with whatever. Yeah, that's interesting to think about.
Oh,